Hi, this is a tutorial on how to use watercolor on food items doodle that I've drawn with ink on watercolor paper. So that ink is a permanent waterproof, fade-proof ink, and it's special. You definitely have to use that. You can't use any marker or pen, otherwise it fade. And paper itself is a watercolor cold press, 300 GSM. Okay, so as you can see on the bottom right corner, I have my palette with a really large mixing tray, and I'm just mixing my colors as I'm going along. So one thing that you have to take notice is that I'm trying to make the light source coming from the top right corner of the paper. And keep that in mind that when the light hits the object, it's definitely going to be the lightest. The part that's farthest away from the object is going to be darkest with the most pigmented. So with watercolor, you don't really need to use a lot of paint. More so you have to use water. So for example, this box of fries here, you can see that the part that's away from the light source is the darkest. Okay, and this is a little bottle of ketchup and mustard. Yeah, you find that I use a lot of the repeating colors. I don't have to mix a lot of them. Just because the popular colors like mustard, ketchup, they're going to be used repeatedly in many of the food items. Like you see the red and yellow that I've been using on the fries, bottles, bread, and pizza. Yes, they tend to repeat. The brush that I use is like a number 4 pointed round brush. Could be any brush that you get from the art store, or yeah, as long as it has a soft round tip, I think it's good. Yeah, so sometimes when the watercolor bleeds out of your boundary, and you just want to use the tissue paper to blot it. Okay, so this is a popcorn. And so you can see I'm using a mixture of red and yellow to fill out a lot of these items. And you know that as you mix red and yellow, you get an orange. Okay, if you want to add some shadows or darker part, you can just add some brown or gray. This is a little water bottle, I assume. Yes. You can see that the part that's away from the light, I'm going to add more color and pigment, and then use a little bit of water to make it lighter. And one thing that you have to pay attention to is the watercolor tends to dry much lighter in pigment than when it's wet. Okay, and I'm doing a really nice lavender, like a purple mixed with green here for a bowl. In terms of how to doodle this stuff, could be a different tutorial, but then it's really simple. Like I didn't even do a pencil outline because as you can see, it's not really formal per se or correct. It just has to be cute And if you made a mistake with the ink and you go, oh no, I can't erase this, okay, just pivot from it and try to make something more out of that mistake. And that's what artists do. Yeah, so with the pizza, I had to wait for the pepperoni slices to dry before I can put any more pigment. And as I'm using the red, I try to look at the picture as a whole to see where I can fill those out. You can see I use a lot of red, orange, and yellow. Okay, and as I'm drawing the purple green, then I can use that color to highlight some of the other items as well, just like the slice of cake and this little what is it called, wrap here. Yes. So this is a taco. And the color could be random, really. You can put anything that you like. Or for example, right now I'm just putting green on the lettuces, vegetables, the little parts that's on the taco and the sandwich. Those are green. And with a beer, you just have to put a really, really light wash of maybe gray or beige so that you know that's three-dimensional. Yeah, this is actually a doggy box, and I don't know, it's a really bad drawing. So. It doesn't matter. If the drawing is bad, it's okay. Because when you add the colors, it's going to cover a lot of mistakes. And after you add the shadows, which I will show, it's going to make the whole thing pop, and they will forgive some bad drawings, so to speak. The viewers will forgive them all, trust me. Yeah, so I was just using some of the color on my palette to fill out some parts that could be anything in color, just like plates, forks, and boxes and all that. Yeah, those don't have a traditional corresponding color, and you can just use what's on your palette. Yeah, with the eggs, even though they are white, you have to make sure that you put a little bit of shadow on the white part that's away from the light. It's not too visible yet. Okay, so drawing's finished, and then you have to pay attention to where the light is coming from. That's how you're going to dictate the cast shadow. Okay, of course, it's not scientific. It's not 100%. You just want to give a viewer an idea. And the viewer is actually very good at discerning how three-dimensional this is. Especially once you have the contrast of light and dark. And with the shadow of the object, it would just suggest the three-dimensionality of it. So you see, as I'm adding the shadows, you definitely see how 3D they've become. These objects have become. And as for the technique, really, as you can see, I'm just adding some pigment and then using a lot of water to make it light. And where the object meets the shadow is definitely going to be the darkest, both on the shadow and the object itself. And one might ask, so what's the shape of a shadow? If it's like a round object, then it's just going to be round, right? If it's like a bottle or something that's a little bit taller, then your shadows should be longer as well. And I'm pretty random in terms of determining the shape of the shadow, but it's okay. When the viewer looks at it, it still makes sense. It just has to make sense. Yeah, and I don't know if you've noticed, but as I'm doing it, some parts of it is drying. Some parts of the paint is drying, and it's drying lighter than when I first applied it. See, the beauty with watercolor is if you want to make a part lighter, just add more water. You don't need to use white at all. As you can see on my palette, I've never used white on this painting. Some of the colors on my palette already has a white mixed into the pigment, like the lavender. It came that way. And because the paper is white and you're doing sort of like a staining effect, and you know that if you want to make that part lighter, you just add more water. As simple as that. And right now I'm just going back to darken some of the shadows. I think they're too light. And these are not like scientific or correct, or like if you measure angles and whatnot, you're not going to find them completely correct. But it is a suggestion. And creating art is about suggesting something, communicating to the viewer. It's not meant to be 100% unless you're doing hyperrealism, which I'm not. As you can see, oh, this is pretty cute, and it makes sense. It's not perfect, but it makes sense. Okay, so as I'm adding the darker shadows, I think I'm pretty much done. And one thing that I do want to mention is if you have made a mistake with watercolor while the paint is still wet, you can always blot it off with tissue paper or magic eraser, sponge, or whatever that's absorbent. You can still work on it while the paint's still wet. It's a little bit more difficult to remove pigment after the paint has dried. Still doable, but much harder. Yeah. See, I'm using a sponge to blot off some of the excess moisture. Okay, and as a final touch, I'm just putting on more colors, maybe some brighter colors to make the objects pop. Yes, I was trying my best to create a 3D view for the viewer, like for a 3D element of the object. And with the cast shadows, it really helps with creating 3-dimensionality. Yep, so I think this is just some finishing touches. Magic eraser is super useful. You just have to blot it with water. And then you can create edges pretty nicely. And also to remove some unwanted pigment.